Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefuehl, today with me AJ. On today's show, we're going to be taking a closer look at the new 718 Spyder with the PDK, and I've come here to Hockenheim, so let's check it out. Here in the 718 Spyder, well, first of all, you have the Spyder logo down here in the lower part of the bumper, which helps it stand out from the rest of the 718s. I also like these aerodynamic channels. Of course, this is also a lot of aerodynamics has been upgraded, and they pay attention to that here in the 718 Spyder. I also like these headlamps, of course, with LED, and I also like the air channels and the vents here right on top in front of the bonnet. Here we see some more channels for that really sophisticated aerodynamics. Of course, in the GT4 you have a big wing and that adds a lot of downforce, but overall the sophisticated aerodynamics also helps reduce drag. You can see here you also get the optional ceramic composite brakes, so the brake rotors itself, but you also have 6-piston calipers in the front and 4-piston calipers in the rear. And this being the Spyder and not the Boxster GTS, we have the manually retractable soft top, which also has an additional kind of opening right over here. A really sexy backside, wouldn't you say? You can see the haunches on the rear a little bit more prominently from this angle. In fact, the whole car seems a lot more hunkered down. In fact, the chassis is lowered by 30 millimeters. I also really like this large diffuser here in the rear with the sports exhaust, which really help you enjoy that naturally aspirated 4-liter Boxster 6. Nestled here is the new 4-liter 6-cylinder naturally aspirated petrol Boxer engine, which powers the 718 Spyder. It makes 420 PS or metric horsepower and 430 Newton meters of torque here with the PDK. That's 10 Newton meters more than the manual, and that's because this dual clutch transmission can handle a higher amount of torque. This means that it can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in half a second faster at 3.9 seconds. And in fact, the gear ratios are a lot shorter in the lower numbers. So 1, 2, 3 especially are a lot shorter than the ones you get in the manual transmission, which, well, it would have been nice to have shorter gearing in the manual so you can play around with the nice shifter a lot more. But nevertheless, here it enables a seamless acceleration. Here in the Spyder, you have to retract the roof manually. So step one, get inside. Press the little latch here, this tab. The window is lower and this hook undoes itself. Next, you gotta get up. You gotta go over here and you gotta remove these side flaps. There's a little button, you gotta feel for it in here. These come out. There's an arrow here and an arrow there. You line those up, that clicks. Same procedure here on the other side. And line those arrows up, those click. Then the roof itself is now open, so you do that, it opens up, and then you go back around here and then you manually retract the roof, close the back, preferably from this side, push it down, it clicks, and you're not done yet. You still have these two flaps, one on this side and one on that side. Anyway, while we're at it, you can also see over here, you do see that there is a little bit of loading area, enough space to throw a couple rucksacks in. In addition to the trunk in the back, you also have a frunk in the front. This is quite cavernous, what you see here, so plenty of space to put more suitcases. And this is one of the reasons why the 718 still remains a fairly usable sports car. I really like this dash of yellow all throughout the interior of the car, which is the same yellow as the exterior color. So it really brings the outside in, makes you feel connected with the car. Let's take a seat inside. Of course, this being a low-slung sports car, you do have to stoop down quite a bit. Nice place to keep the key, or rather you have to insert the key. These bucket seats, first of all, you know, you have to make sure you climb over this to get inside. But once you're inside, you have the perfect driving position, really low down, really connected with the center of gravity of the car. These bucket seats really hold you in place. They're really great side bolstering, really nice contour, and of course lightweight carbon fiber Spyder badging on the top. Side airbags as well, so really sophisticated seats. Continuing with that great driving position is this gorgeous GT steering wheel with Alcantara. I mean, Porsche, I think, makes some of the best steering, and the steering wheel itself is a big part of that control interface, that engagement that you get as a driver. And of course, being the PDK now, you have the paddle shifters, which are nice metal. They have a nice damped sound. They have cold feel. I mean, when you touch them, they're cold because they're metal, so I always like that. I think a lot of people will still appreciate the fact that you have so many buttons as well. So even all the shortcuts down here for your media, for the nav, the map, connecting to the phone, the car settings directly. So you have these hot buttons, as well as being able to, for example, if you are in the tuner, you can use this knob on the right hand side to scroll through the different channels. The instruments of the 718 I think are a great combination of retro and modern. So you have things like Apple CarPlay, but at the same time you have things like a CD player. And that continues here to the instrumentation. So you have a large tach that takes center stage right in the middle, a speedo on the left, with some displays as well, which shows you some interesting information that's very useful, like the speed and the trip. But on the right hand side you have a screen. So here you have things like the vehicle information regarding oil and different settings. All right, let's take the 718 GT4 out for a couple hot laps on this handling course. It's a very tight course, so it's not going to be very high speed, and the conditions today on the track are really quite treacherous, very slippery conditions. But here as well, the handling characteristic of the 718 becomes more evident, where you have that mid-engine, so if you lose control, it starts twitching and swinging. But nevertheless, it's still a bit more balanced than the 911. And with the PDK, even in the Spyder and the GT4, it's the same engine and transmission, so the same powertrain and drivetrain. The PDK has the shorter gearing in the first few ratios, so which means that you can still play between in second and third gear and not have to keep it in second gear the whole time like we had to do back with the manual. The steering as well, I really like this Alcantara grip. It's very nice to hold, and you hear the engine a lot louder. That 4-liter naturally aspirated Boxer 6 is quite loud here. Of course, even here in the coupe, even though we have a little bit better sound deadening thanks to that hard top, the engine is right behind your head. In the 911, the engine is a little bit further behind, and you have that extra rear seat, so while you hear it, it's not as evident and prominent as it is here in the 718. But yeah, with the PDK, the shifts are lightning quick, so on a faster stretch, you don't have to worry about any gaps in acceleration. It's a very seamless acceleration. I have the suspension in PDK Sport, the suspension in stiff mode, the PDK in Sport, but it is shifting up a bit too early for my taste. So right now it's in third gear, again because of that slightly closer ratios. It tends to shift up maybe a little bit earlier, but you have the paddle shifters to take control for yourself. This is the kind of, the tricky situation with the 718 is it's a bit more of a track car, so it kind of makes more sense to have the PDK, but at the same time, for me, Porsches, as much as they're about top speed and track records, they're also about pure driver engagement. Here we are in the Spyder, and we're going to go through a little village before we get out onto one of my favorite sections of twisty mountain roads. So let's kind of talk a little bit about how the Spyder is to live with if you were to consider this as a everyday sports car. First of all, I've driven this car for a couple days last year already when it was released with the manual transmission, if you guys remember. And even then, you know, this is a GT, and therefore it is a little bit more track focused. So even with the sports suspension turned off, it is quite bumpy. You feel everything, all the edges are filtering into your seat. So it's not comfortable. That being said though, the seats are actually very supportive. So you fit very snug, so it fits like a glove. And while the padding itself might not be that plush, it doesn't really hurt after a long time in the seat. So I think it's actually surprisingly comfortable. The visibility again here in the Spyder is not that great because of that top, the soft top. Speaking of which, the soft top is very lightweight and it doesn't do a good job of sound insulation, not at all. In fact, if you're on the Autobahn and there's cars passing you and there's rain like there is now, it feels almost like the windows are open because you can hear so much of that. I also wish the technology was a little bit better, a little bit more upgraded now for this model year at least. And I do like the fact that there are only 3 clocks, which means I can see all 3 of them really well, as compared to say the 911 Turbo, which has the 5, and I can't really see where they are. But yeah, it's much better than that in terms of visibility. But it's still, the graphics are not that sharp, and there aren't so many different options. You have regular cruise control, but no, other kind of semi-autonomous driving, which, to be honest, is not what this car is meant for. Your money is going elsewhere. It's going to that engine. Speaking of which, driving with a light foot through country roads, I've been able to manage 10.5 liters for 100 kilometers, if you're interested in that kind of a thing. If not, well, look what we have here, a beautiful winding road. So let's turn the PDK to sport. Let's turn the loud exhaust mode on. I'm going to keep the suspension in soft mode because this is a very rough, bumpy road, not a track. So I would rather have a little bit more compliant suspension so that the wheels are more in contact with the ground. I'm going to be very easy on the throttle because the surface is very wet, and being a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, it's very twitchy. If you lose a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, you lose it. It's really hard to control, and I'm not Walter Roll. I'm not going to be able to catch it. So I'm going to take it easy, but that engine is really the gem. It's the highlight of this car. The handling and the chassis, of course, but naturally aspirated 4-liter Boxer 6 engine. You just got to ease it, and the power delivery is so linear. So while the little boy in my head says floor it in the mid corner, I know that if I do, it's just going to spin around on me. So I have a very gentle application with the throttle, and it responds. It's very telepathic. What I do with my right leg is exactly what the engine does. And again, thanks to these shorter gear ratios, you actually have the ability to actually go from second to third if you wanted to. And the PDK means there is no interruption in the acceleration. Steering, as always, with Porsche sports cars at least, is impeccable. You feel everything. It's like you're running your hand on the surface of the road, and it's such direct feedback. It's a very quick rack, but at the same time, at center, it's very composed. So it never feels twitchy. The twitchiness only comes from the bumpy, stiff suspension, but the steering wheel never gives you any kind of wavering kind of a feedback. It's very consistent. It's very sure-footed. Let's summarize today's episode of the Porsche 718 GT4 and the Spyder, now with the PDK double-clutch transmission. First of all, the PDK commands about a €3,000 premium over the manual transmission. So now you're looking at something around 97,000 euros. But you know how it is with options. Realistically, these are around 100,000. So what did I like and what did I not like? Well, first of all, you have to love that naturally aspirated engine. It just makes the whole experience so much more visceral, so much more raw. And that brings me to the next point. Coupled with the PDK, it actually gets the best out of this engine. In fact, you can even get a little bit more torque. This is up by 10 Newton meters over the manual. So you have seamless acceleration. And that really complements this GT4's characteristic because it's a lot more race focused. It feels like a boy racer. Whereas with the Spyder, I see this more as a car that I want to enjoy on winding roads with the roof down in the summer. And for that, I think the manual would be a little bit better if only the manual's gear ratios were not so tall. Ultimately, I think it really comes down to what you want. Do you want a track toy? Then the GT4, now with the new engine and the PDK, is a phenomenal car. It's engaging enough because you're constantly going to be working at the wheel and trying to get the best out of it, and the paddle shifters work really great. But if you're looking at something to enjoy winding roads with somebody sitting next to you, or maybe going for a nice little drive out on the weekend, but you want that naturally aspirated petrol engine and you want a manual, I don't know if this is going to be the best option for you there. That's just my opinion. But ultimately, these are phenomenal cars to have fun with. What I didn't like so much, for example, would be the fact that they didn't really upgrade the technology so much. I wish there was a little bit more better touchscreen infotainment system. I wish the graphics were a little bit better. I wish the rear view camera was standard on the Spyder, because without it you really can't see anything. And I wish those kinds of assistance systems were also available, just because it would make it a lot more usable. And that brings me to the last point. 718s don't have the rear seats, and with these GT models the suspension is very firm, so that's something you have to keep in mind. So ultimately, for me, it would be the GT4 that makes the most sense and is the pick of the range. What do you guys think? Let me know, put it down in the comments below.